Polite notice. Milton's Adventure, a Milton story, is now available as downloadable MP3 files, so you can listen on the go wherever you want, without the need for internet. Isn't modern life wonderful? Link in the description below. Milton's Adventure, a Milton story, narrated by me, Ted Pawncroft. Chapter 12, 24 Hours to Kill, Part 4, The Curse of Gnumbling. Throughout the lone tower, atop the misty mound at the edge of the swamp, echoing cackles of a most wicked nature could be heard bouncing up the dark stairways and around the cold, eerie chambers. A dim light came from the room at the very top of the tower, a gleaming pinprick amidst the vast mask of twilight. Inside, something especially insidious was taking place.
"Make haste, Fennog, dear sister. We haven't much time,"
ordered a hunched figure, sat in an old rocking chair in a sharp, scratchy voice. A second figure, a sight more gaunt and wiry than the first, responded in a nasally tone with a hint of sardonic reproach.
Yes, Gubtridge, dearest sister of mine. Anything you say."
The second figure resumed its task of hobbling between candles arranged in a circle on the hardwood floor in the very centre of the chamber and bending to light them. The witch Gubtridge spoke again, half cast in shadow, lit only by the flickering wicks of the candles.
"And Schree, my dear, spread the salts more evenly. We can't afford to make any mistakes. The bog moon only comes around but once a year."
A third figure, far more squat and with a significantly worse posture than the other two, cackled and repeated the order like a fat cockatoo, imitating its owner, as she sprinkled out the thick grey powder in an elaborate circular pattern.
"Spread the salts more evenly."
Gubtridge sat back in her chair with a creak and pressed her gnarled fingertips together.
Exceptional work indeed,"
she said in her croaky drawl, accompanied by a peculiar clicking that came from the sides of her mouth.
"The summoning will be complete in no time."
The three hags continued their ritual, Schree clumsily arranging the salts, and Fennog carefully lighting candles, all while Gubtridge sat in her creaky wooden throne, rocking back and forth, her long shadow moving menacingly across the stony walls of the chamber. In time, the arrangement on the floorboards became a complex pattern of arcane runes and symbols, a sinister mosaic of evil and deceit. Skulls of hapless creatures and branches of withered herbs, dehydrated berries, and dried potpourri were placed meticulously around it by Fennog, in accordance with an illustration in a worn tome that the three hags referenced scrupulously. The very centre of the circle was left bare, illuminated by the milky white light of the full moon drawn in through the little circular window, the only one in the whole room. At last, Gubtridge spoke with a grin.
"The deed is done, dear sisters. All that is left is the final step. Soon the bloodstone chalice will be in my hands. Just think of the infinite power I will command."
"In your hands?"
cried Fennog, insulted.
"We swore the green oath together, dear sister. We agreed that we would share the power fairly between us."
Gubtridge waved her ghastly claw.
Yes, of course, dear sister of mine."
"When we have the power, I shall open a sweet shop,"
grinned Schree, her bulbous googly eyes blinking out of sync. Fennog wordlessly dealt Schree a sharp blow to the head. Gubtridge rose to her feet and hobbled to the summoning circle with the aid of a gnarled walking cane.
"Now, dear sisters, let us take our places around the circle and complete the final step."
The three hideous crones shuffled into place, stepping onto three equidistant smaller circles and facing towards the middle. In unison, they drew long, rusted hairpins from their matted black locks and pricked the tips of their bony fingers. From each of the witch's digits, a single droplet of green blood ballooned forth and dripped to the floorboards below. Immediately, the wicked runes began to glow a sickly green, and steam began to rise from the floor, accompanied by a loud hissing and a putrid gaseous stench. The hags cackled and chortled as the chamber filled completely with repulsive green smoke, so thick that nothing could be seen through it. As soon as the fumes cleared, a bizarre square doorframe, composed of a solid black rock, stood in the centre of the circle where nothing had before. The three hags remained motionless, staring upon it in silent reverence. From the magical aperture stepped forth a figure most enigmatic, a young boy wearing jeans and a hoodie, with a complacent smirk on his face.
"Bitch, what?"
said Milton, perplexed. In a flash, the three witches pounced, and Milton remembered no more.
Gubtridge, Fennog, and Schree, the sisters of Gnumbling Schree,
will feed you must and drain your blood.
and put you in a tree.
Milton awoke suddenly. He was tied down onto a cold stone table with a thick slimy rope. Before him, three horrible old ladies stood around a great pewter cauldron that resembled a shiny black beetle, immersed in stirring whatever putrid potion was brewing within it, while referencing an old book. Milton unequivocally knew these geriatric harridans to be the witches of Gnumbling, the demons he had come to slay, a mighty 3-in-1 combo to advance his 24-hour challenge. He squinted to get a better look. These old bats were visually displeasing to say the least, and he was suitably horrified to see that they moved around on not ordinary humanoid legs, but scuttled upon 4 spidery pedipalps. In contrast to their humanoid torsos and arms, the arachnid hags also bore large hairy abdomens and disgusting mandibles at the sides of their mouths, which created constant and infuriating wet clicking noises. The largest of the spidery crones, who stirred the noxious pot with a long stick, wore a tattered black dress and a large amount of mismatched jewellery, as though it were selected by a magpie with no fashion sense. Upon her warty and calloused forehead was a circlet bearing a wide-open eye, in humorous contrast to her own slit-like milky-white cataract-induced peepers. Her long fingers bore countless rings and bands, her wrists innumerable bracelets and bangles, and around her greasy wattled neck a single necklace bearing a pendant resembling the head of an owl. As she churned the foul mixture, she licked her dry, thin lips with a black tongue, while the second hag added herbs and roots with dexterous tosses from her pallid, scrawny claws. The second witch was dressed in very little else but a tattered shawl and the bones of other creatures, leaving little to the imagination. Her lengthy beaked nose and single rotting bottom canine were her defining features, as well as her emaciated frame and strands of wiry hair that dangled from her flaky scalp. The final hag was the most detestable of all, a frumpy runt wearing a little bonnet with glassy frog-like eyes facing different ways. Her nose was bulbous and warty, and her mouth fixed into a permanent, brainless grin, above which was a surprisingly fulsome moustache. She muttered words of nonsense under her breath, clutching Milton's very own bloodstone chalice and caressing it with hairy, arthritic fingers. Milton shuddered and took a cursory glance around the chamber. It was much like one would imagine a traditional witch's lair, filled with hanging sacks of bones, shelves of mouldy books and unpleasant bottled liquids, small dead animals in cages and reptiles pickled in jars, ancient trinkets and pungent botanical remedies, all accompanied by the smell of sulphurous cabbage, like when you leave food in the fridge for too long. The Gustman Gateway stood tall in the centre of a circle of dust and candles, its shimmering portal having expired and disappeared. He breathed a small sigh of relief. An antique nightstand to his right bore his Puckanese dagger and monkey magic backpack, both unsullied. Milton watched intently as the three witches began to circle the cauldron while chanting a dreadful rhyme, seemingly corresponding to the revolting items that they threw into the pot.
Tusk of hawker, hair of dog, frog spawn of the thrub-hush frog,
Powerless long and I have known.
in accordance with the tome, perished figs and rotten beets,
Will form the flippers on his feet.
a sprig of parsley, a dash of mace, will grow the whiskers pon his face,
Half a spoon of anal yeast.
will turn the bite a monstrous beast. Now leave to boil for half an hour.
Then check and add some whole wheat flour.
Hey ladies!
Shouted Milton.
Planning on taunting me anytime soon, or are you just gonna keep on singing?
The three hags span around to face the sudden noise.
Silence, brat! We are preparing a brew.
Screeched Gubtridge.
I can see that.
Responded Milton coyly.
That was an awfully long list of ingredients. Is it a tasty soup or some kind of delicious stew?
The three witches laughed simultaneously.
It is a potion.
Declared Gubtridge.
A potion to put you in your place, chalice bearer.
Continued Fennog, hands on her bony hips.
Oh goodness! What's it going to do?
Asked Milton in mock shock. Unbeknownst to them, he'd be able to flex and bust out of his constraints in a second, thanks to his superhuman strength. The witches cackled again.
It is a potion of animalius transmotagmatism,
Said Fennog.
Animaglius musculatism.
Repeated the senile Scree, receiving angry glares from the other two.
Once the potion touches your lips, you will live out the rest of your days permanently transformed into a witless, hapless beast.
Explained Gubtridge.
Then, in your new spirit animal form, you will be out of the equation forever, and the chalice will be ours.
Turn me into an animal?
Repeated Milton, really hamming it up for the bit.
Why would you want to do that? Why don't you just kill me?
Not nearly as funny.
Snapped Fennog.
When you are a disgusting lowly creature, you will spend your days wallowing in the mud and muck, unable to walk, unable to talk.
And we, dear sisters, shall have the full power of the chalice for ourselves.
Said Gubtridge, before looking around in alarm.
Where is the chalice?
Scree still held the goblet and was caressing it gently while singing under her breath. Gubtridge snatched it from her and cupped it in her own horrid hands, staring at it intently with her black tongue lolling out. Fennog's face wrinkled and her eyes narrowed.
Gubtridge, dear sister, I recall that we swore to return the chalice to the mighty Krog if it were ever to come into our possession.
Gubtridge snapped out of her daze.
Yes, of course, my dear sister, of course. We will return it to the mighty Krog.
Actually, I'd rather like it back.
Interjected Milton.
It is mine, after all.
Yours?
Cackled Gubtridge and Fennog in unison. Gubtridge grinned widely.
The chalice will never be yours. We summoned you here to be sure of it.
What?
Said Milton, raising his eyebrow.
You didn't summon me here. I came here through my magic portal, actually.
Balderdash!
Shrieked Gubtridge.
We summoned you here using the ancient bog moon ritual. It has been weeks in the making.
Have you any idea how long it took us to amass the ingredients?
Spat Fennog, pointing her long index finger at Milton.
I found the parsley.
Said Scree. Milton laughed and shook his head.
Look, ladies, I don't know about all this bog moon stuff you're talking about, but I came here of my own volition, through that portal, all by myself.
Milton indicated the portal with a head movement.
You were next on my list, so I teleported here. End of story. Case closed, job done.
But the magic ritual,
Said Gubtridge desolately.
Sounds like a big fat coincidence to me.
Shrugged Milton.
Sorry to burst your bubble. Maybe you should consider another career path. Sounds like the art of conjuration might not be for you.
silence!
Squawked Gubtridge.
I have heard enough. Dear sisters, let us feed this talkative little brat his potion.
Milton watched as the witches lowered a mighty wooden ladle into the cauldron and spooned a generous helping of the repugnant purple goo into the chalice.
If he likes the chalice so much, then we will allow him to drink from it one last time.
Giggled Gubtridge perversely. Fennog watched anxiously.
Will the broth not sully the precious artifact?
Of course not, dear sister. Don't be so stupid.
retorted Gubtridge curtly, shambling forth to the bound Milton, cupping the goo-filled chalice in her 2 rotten hands. Her ghoulish features slid into view, allowing Milton an up-close view of her verrucose nose and large spidery mouthparts, which ended in glistening black fangs.
No! I'll not drink it!
Protested Milton, putting on his best show of writhing around in reluctance.
Fennog, hold him steady.
Snapped Gubtridge. Milton felt the cold, bony hands of Fennog wrap around his head, sending a chill through his body. No matter, soon those hands would be lifeless and dead. Gubtridge brought the chalice to Milton's lips. The thick indigo substance within was bubbling and fizzing over the edge, accompanied by a ghastly odour of rotten figs and Gouda cheese.
You won't make me do it! I won't open my mouth!
Cried Milton, clamping his lips shut.
Pinch his nose, dear sister.
Ushered Gubtridge.
He will have no choice but to open up.
Fennog followed the order and placed her revolting fingertips on Milton's nostrils. Milton played along, holding his breath for a few seconds as Gubtridge began to tip the chalice. He counted in his head. 3, 2, 1. Milton burst free from his slimy constraints, slapping the chalice from Gubtridge's grip with his left hand. The chalice flew through the air in what seemed like slow motion, the purple potion spilling from it to land on the floorboards with a clunk, the remaining liquid seeping down through the cracks. The witches cried out in anguish as Milton rolled from the table and jumped into action. He wiped his lips clean from the horrible juice.
There'll be no witchcraft or wizardry today, thank you very much.
The witches made hissing noises with their insectoid maws and withdrew crooked knives from their robes, but it was already too late. Using his awesome powers of telekinesis, Milton willed his Puckanese blade to fly from the nightstand and into his grasp.
Ka-ching!
Gubtridge sprang forth on her 4 hairy legs, but Milton came out swinging, slicing her clean across her wattled gullet. She was stunned and dropped her weapon, grasping at her open wound as green goo poured forth from it. Milton pounced upon her, grabbing her horrible head and pressing his fingers deep into her milky white eyeballs, popping them promptly. As she let out a blood-curdling yelp, he picked her up and flung her in the direction of Fennog and Schree, who were attempting a sneak attack from the right. Gubtridge fell into her sisters with flying force, and the witches of Gnumbling collapsed in a pile of twitching pulps and feelers.
Hey, ladies! Something wicked this way comes!
Shouted Milton, heaving the pewter cauldron up from the floor and lifting it above his head to send it crashing down upon the 3 cowering crones, splitting the pot into pieces and crushing them dead in a great tsunami of purple goo. Milton stepped back, shielding himself from the splash. His work here was done. Milton dusted off his hands.
Right, that's the end of that.
Before he commanded the bird to expel the witches, he went to attend to his beloved chalice, rinsing it out in an old basin in the corner of the lair. As he cleansed the glass of every last drop of the potion, he caught his reflection in a cracked, greasy mirror above the sink, and happened to notice that a small droplet of the purple mixture had run down into the corner of his right eye. He blinked a few times and, to his dismay, saw that the droplet had seeped into his caruncle.
Oh, fuck!
He winced, rubbing at it and blinking again. His eye, now bloodshot and dyed with a light purple tinge, stung very slightly. He shrugged.
I'm sure a minuscule amount like that couldn't do any damage.
He dried off the chalice with a mouldy rag and returned to the crushed witches, who had now dissolved into a fine green bubbling foam, leaving behind only their tattered robes and jewellery. Milton clapped his hands, and the bird flew from his bag on the nightstand to do the dirty work, expelling the liquid witches away forever with its white spell. He watched expectantly as the chalice filled up to the very top with orange essence.
What? They only count as 1 demon? What a swizz!
Said Milton, chugging it back regardless.
Right, time to get the hell out of here. My work here is done,
He said with a slight lisp.
Hold on, since when have I had a lisp?
He rushed to the cracked mirror to see that his once subtly sized canines now resembled tusks that poked out from between his lips.
Oh shit!
He cried toothily, touching at his augmented gnashes. As he stared in terror at the mirror, he saw his skin begin to perspire. He touched his cheek, and it felt wet and oily, as though it were made out of, blubber.
What's happening to me?
He cried, taking off his Mumbodian cap to see that, to his absolute horror, his luscious blonde locks had disappeared completely, replaced with a moist, smooth scalp with unsightly grey blotches. He dropped the hat to the floor. His heart was racing. The witch's hex had worked. That one droplet had somehow got into his system. Either that, or he hadn't washed the chalice out properly. He watched as the pubescent blonde bumfluff on his upper lip sprouted out into long whiskers, and his nose began to elongate, resembling a snout. What was he being turned into? What was his spirit animal?
I've got to put a stop to this,
he cried, rushing from the basin to the bookcase and hurriedly tossing books off it, desperately searching for a spellbook or magic compendium that could reverse the effects. He glanced to the floor. There was the tome that the witches had been using to make the potion, a big black book with a scary-looking cover depicting 2 dancing skeletons. He opened it and flipped through it. Herbs, plants, roots, nothing about being turned into an animal. Ooh, it was hot in here. He yanked at his t-shirt collar. He was sweating. Runes, charms, talismans, still nothing about animal transformation. He threw the book to the floor.
I'm too hot,
he cried, hastily pulling off his hoodie and shirt. He felt that he was going to suffocate. Looking down at his hands in terror, he saw that his once delicate and nimble human fingers had fused together into 2 big flippers.
No! I'm a seal!
He cried, a single tear running down his damp cheek. He wrenched off his jeans to see that his legs were changing too, now thick and blubbery. In seconds he had fallen to the floor, unable to keep his balance. His legs had completely fused together, replaced with a long tail ending in 2 dorsal flippers where his feet used to be. He had to get out of here. The Gustman gate was still activated just ahead, his only escape. Milton shuffled forwards, inching himself along like a big wet worm with a great deal of friction from the wooden floor. His body was now totally pinnipedal, and no trace of the old Milton remained. He opened his mouth to activate the Gustman, but a loud "Ugh" came out instead. It was no use. His vocal cords had already mutated. Seal Milton collapsed in a heap on his side, breathing heavily and snorting defeatedly. He saw his reflection in a puddle of purple goo on the floor. Black beady eyes and a dog-like muzzle. Was this how it was to be? Was this his ultimate fate? Transformed into a seal with no hope of ever turning back? "Oh!" he wailed. He tried to remember why he was here. He tried to remember the old ways of Milton. Gaming, food, something about a chalice, killing demons. He had 24 hours to do something, but he couldn't remember what. Only one thing was at the forefront of his mind now. Water. Cool, lovely water. Wouldn't it be nice to go for a little swim and cool off? He snorted, galumphing towards the stairs in the corner of the chamber. Seal Milton flopped down onto the first step, then lost his balance, rolling down the entire staircase that coiled up the pitch-dark tower and out of the doorway at the bottom to land with a slap on the wet grass. Snorted Seal Milton. It was raining. The grass underneath him was slimy and cool, just how he liked it. He flopped forward onto a well-trodden dirt path that had now become mud from the deluge, and moved himself down it, slipping along and using his flippers to propel himself down the hill and away from the witch's tower. There it was at the bottom of the mound, just what he'd wanted. A big body of water. A bog surrounded by tall reeds and scraggly trees. Seal Milton uttered a snort of triumph and slid down the rest of the hill like a little kid at Alton Towers. He swerved deftly through the reeds and rushes and plunged into the water. At last, water. This was what life was about. Seal Milton waggled his rear flippers like a ship's rudder and undulated his body in a twirling motion, jetting forwards through the murky swamp at speeds unmatched by almost any other marine mammal. Finally he could swim. The seal truly was his spirit animal. The water cleared as he delved further into the swamp, which was starting to become more of a lake. He could see as clear as day all manner of freshwater plant life, lush green pondweed, the dangling fronds of water lilies, and a variety of algae and kelps. He exhaled air bubbles of fulfillment from his snout. This was the place to be for him. Suddenly, something darted out of sight from the corner of his vision. Only one thing could improve his mood now: a tasty fish. In another corner of the swamp, not so far away, the horrid, odious wretch known as Bilger was going about his horrible little day. A disgusting little man was Bilger, almost toad-like in appearance, with the posture of a decrepit old-age pensioner, and the attitude of one to boot. His loose and sagging skin was a milky pale blue, much like a slab of aged Stilton, even down to the same veiny texture and odour. Upon his discoloured and misshapen body he wore a few ragged and torn garments that could barely pass as clothes by any definition. A tattered Hessian waistcoat that was busting apart at the seams, barely holding back his distended pot-belly. A pair of ancient linen shorts which were nigh on see-through due to the worn-away thinness of the threads, and a fine straw boater. As he patrolled the bog, the miserable bastard sang to himself in a croaky, high-pitched voice, indicative of the large amount of phlegm lodged in his windpipe.
Hello, my name is Bilger. Look at the size of my toes. That's why my name is Bilger. Notice the hairs on my nose.
Bilger wasn't lying. His long, almost perfectly straight nose was rich with nasal hair, both atop the bridge and in and around the nostrils. As for his toes, well, he wasn't lying about those either. They were big, greasy, and webbed, matching his hands, calloused and veiny with a monumental amount of mud and slime caked beneath the hardened yellow fingernails. In his little rhyme, Bilger had failed to mention his gigantic pointed ears, perhaps out of some deep-rooted embarrassment. All in all, the foul lout was a sight to behold. Bilger strutted across the mudbanks, clutching his big stick with the net on the end. Bilger loved his net stick. It was one of his favourite objects, because it allowed him to catch fish that swam about in the water. And when Bilger caught the fish that swam about in the water, he would be able to cook them and eat them back at his home. Bilger scratched his posterior and sniffed his fingers. He hadn't eaten a good fish in a few days now. He was hungry, and his big belly was grumbling about it. He approached the bank and poised at the edge, ready to cast out his net stick. He squinted at the surface, taking in all the ripples and bubbles with his beady blue eyes. Within moments he had spied a blue tribbler darting through the murky waters.
That's dinner,
he croaked, licking his fat green lips. Bilger cast his net stick in the general direction of the fish. The net hit the water and sat there for a while before Bilger felt a tug so powerful that it nearly pulled him in. But Bilger stood his ground and pulled back. Blue tribblers didn't usually put up this much of a fight. Bilger gave an almighty yank and fell back as a colossal catch burst from the waters, all tangled up in his net. This fish was big indeed, bigger than any he'd seen in a long while, and it had the little blue tribbler pierced on the end of one of its two long teeth. Bilger scrambled to his big flat feet and beheld his catch.
What's this? Bilger's caught a big un.
This fish was unlike anything Bilger had ever fished up. It was big, grey and slimy like a goin slug, with strange little flippers like a river riblet. He wouldn't be able to eat this. The beast exuded a snort of air and blinked its little black eyes. It opened its toothy maw and threw back its head to consume the fish lodged on its tusk. Bilger sprang forth on nimble little legs, swiping the blue tribbler just before the big grey monster could neck it back. As Bilger fled with the fish, the monster swung its powerful tail and tripped him up. Bilger lay in a heap as the big beast reared up on its front flippers, towering over him.
Move!
Bilger thought to see a glimmer in the beast's eyes. Something was off about them, as though they didn't quite fit with the rest of the body. The beast thwacked its weight against the ground as Bilger rolled out of the way, cradling the little blue tribbler. He scrambled to his feet again and cried out.
Stop! Bilger says stop!
The beast stopped and sneezed.
You understand, Bilger, do you not? Bilger can see. Bilger sees you're not like the other monsters of the swamp.
Move!
Snorted the monster, cocking its head as though it were listening. Bilger held forth the little blue fish, which flapped limply in his grasp.
You want the fish, do you not? Bilger can give you the fish. Bilger can cook you the fish. If you follow Bilger back to Bilger's home.
The monster stared blankly. Bilger beckoned with his long fingers.
Follow Bilger. Come.
Bilger started to walk backwards, still holding the fish and making sure not to break eye contact. The twinkle reappeared in the monster's eyes as it heaved itself forwards. Bilger continued this way for a few minutes, goading the lumbering beast along. This was the largest thing he'd ever seen in the swamp by a stretch, larger than the dreaded whirlipogs and even the monstrous Pippopotopus. If he could get this thing on his side, then even those horrors would fear him. In time they came to a small inlet that branched off from the lake. Here, among the reeds and mud, Bilger had made his home. It was a modest home built into the side of the bank, which was actually more like a cave than a house. Bilger pushed aside the reeds and swatted at a cloud of large blood-sucking insects with his net stick.
This is Bilger's home. It's a humble life for Bilger, but Bilger makes do.
Bilger grinned, showing his yellowed, nearly orange teeth. The monster flopped forwards and plunged into the dark brown water that streamed past Bilger's inlet. Bilger stepped into his grotto, which was without a door and simply had an open hole for an entrance, and lit a small, grubby lantern that hung from the wall. The inside of the home was incredibly damp and wet, but featured a few homely trimmings that Bilger was very proud of. First and foremost, his woven reed table and chairs where he ate his fish dinners. These had taken Bilger a very long time to weave, and had cost him many a blistered finger. Secondly, were his numerous portraits, which he had painted with various crushed berries and seed pods, and framed with bits of wood that he found on the ground. These works of art had taken Bilger countless hours to create, and all 5 of them depicted his greatest muse, himself, in a variety of poses and stances. Thirdly, and perhaps most importantly, was his bust, also of himself, entirely formed from toenail clippings. Bilger rubbed his hands together.
Stay there, swamp monster. Bilger will prepare dinner.
Bilger gently leaned his net stick against the wall next to a shelf where he displayed his dead bug shells, and doffed his boater upon a hat stand which showcased a few of his other hats, likewise dented and beaten up. Muttering under his breath, he shuffled past the soiled bedroll where he spent his nights, and the cold, muddy hole where he stored his butter, arriving at his rudimentary fire pit where he cooked all his dinners. He turned back to the beast, which sat watching intently in the entrance of the cave.
Watch now, swamp monster, as Bilger makes the magic happen.
By removing a red-powdered substance from his waistcoat and tossing it into the fire pit, Bilger miraculously lit the coals. With very little grace, he skewered the blue tribbler on a long pointed stick and placed it on a spit over the hot flames. Bilger sat next to the fire, talking under his breath and rubbing his legs as the fish cooked.
Life wasn't always like this for Bilger. You know, Bilger came upon hard times and had to flee here. It wasn't Bilger's fault.
Bilger turned the fish slowly as the swamp monster watched attentively.
Bilger can see that there's more to the swamp monster than meets the eye. Bilger knows. Bilger says.
The monster blinked.
A curse. Bilger can see the swamp monster has been changed recently. He wasn't the monster Bilger thinks. Bilger knows of a cure for the swamp monster. In the eye of the swamp, the crown jewel. Bilger can show the swamp monster the way there.
Responded the swamp monster.
Dinner is ready.
Croaked Bilger, removing the fish from the spit and slapping it onto the dirty ground.
Bilger gets half. Swamp monster gets half. This is fair.
Bilger struck the fish with the pointy stick several times, desecrating it somewhat until it was crudely split into 2 halves. Bilger tossed the smaller half to the monster, who consumed it in one go. Bilger shook his head in disapproval.
Bilger has learned to savour the flavour of his fish dinner. Bilger does not know how often Bilger can get one these days.
The swamp monster watched as Bilger slowly and silently ate his half of the fish, licking his greased fingers, groaning periodically, and rubbing his fat stomach. Finally, the meal was consumed, and Bilger let out an enormous belch and got to his feet.
Bilger thinks that we should leave now.
He indicated a modest wooden coracle that floated upside down in the corner of the cave that was submerged in water.
This was Bilger's boat. It is broke. Bilger will have to, try something else.
A grin spread across his grubby face once more. Spluttered the monster. Seal Milton burst through the reeds at top speeds with the disgusting little man riding on his back.
Woo!
Cried Bilger, waving his net stick and clutching his boater so it didn't fly off.
Bilger's found himself a mount.
The duo ploughed through the waters of the swamp, passing masses of lily pads and bulrushes and churning up huge quantities of muck behind them. Bilger hooted and hollered, jumping up and down on the back of the beast.
Bilger swims at last!
Just up ahead, amongst a particularly large mass of lily pads, was what Bilger had spoken of. The grand prize, the piece de résistance, the crown jewel itself. A small, golden lotus-like flower with beautiful shimmering petals that radiated a golden aura for meters around it.
Bilger spies the golden glinter! Slow down!
Suddenly, from beneath the waters came a low groan and a swelling of bubbles that rose to the surface.
Careful, swamp monster. There are still other angry, nasty monsters beneath the water.
Warned Bilger, as Seal Milton swam away from the disturbance. Try as he might, Seal Milton could not see what had made the noise through the sheer amount of impenetrable weeds that stemmed from the bases of the water lilies.
Get closer, swamp monster. We're closing in on the jewel.
Whatever was beneath the surface was giving chase, evident by the large ripples panning out across the muddy waters. Whatever it was big. Seal Milton ploughed onwards, undulating his body like a giant rudder towards the golden lotus. In seconds they had made it to the giant central lily pad upon which grew the crown jewel, its golden roots stemming out across the big green leaf. Gripping onto Seal Milton's blubbery back with his sharp fingernails, Bilger leaned out and made a grab at the flower with his net stick. The swipe was just powerful enough to cut through the plant, and the golden head of the flower fell into Bilger's net.
At last! Bilger has the crown jewel!
Bilger held the golden prize aloft in his net.
Now all in the swamp will bow down to Bilger. Quick, swamp monster, back to shore. Bilger will cradle the precious flower.
Seal Milton turned on a dime, just as a large shadow began to pass underneath him, and headed back for the riverbank, leaving the lily cluster and the scary dark shape behind. Seal Milton burst from the waters with a mighty leap and landed on the wettened mud, sending Bilger toppling off and rolling across the bank. But the little blue man couldn't care less, for he was in possession of the crown jewel. Bilger began to chuckle.
It's mine, all mine.
Seal Milton advanced inquisitively, but Bilger stepped away, pocketing the flower selfishly.
Back off, swamp monster!
Bilger laughed his phlegmy little chortle again, dramatically pulling his net stick into 2 parts, revealing that the handle concealed a long hidden blade fashioned from a sharp slab of flint.
The flower is Bilger's.
Snorted Seal Milton in shock, slapping his belly.
That's right, you swamp monster. Bilger has been cursed as well. For 50 long years, Bilger has had to live in squalor. The witches cursed Bilger, made Bilger intolerable to all his friends, made Bilger smell and take up bad habits. All Bilger's friends turned against Bilger, and Bilger had to live here. But no longer, for the swamp monster foolishly helped Bilger cross to the dreaded eye of the swamp. Bilger has the crown jewel now.
Bilger held his head high again and laughed. What he did not notice was that behind him, the real swamp monster was emerging from the waters. A great beast of mud, shaped like a man but 10 times bigger. It stepped from the water, pondweed and ooze dripping from its hulking form. Through the layers of mud and muck upon its frightful, filthy face, 2 fiery green eyes were visible. Bilger stood between Seal Milton and the monster, still guffawing.
Bilger has the crown jewel, and he will eat it all by himself. Then he won't smell any more, and his skin will be clean. No more spots and welts for Bilger.
The great monster of mud advanced, every step shaking the ground beneath it, but still Bilger did not see. Seal Milton backed away as the monster drew closer to Bilger, raising a huge weapon covered in algae and pond scum. Cried Seal Milton, but it was already too late. The weapon came down upon Bilger and sent him flying with a dreadful clang that ran out through the swamp. Bilger's straw boater floated to the ground and was immediately crushed beneath the mud-covered monster's foot as it continued its tread, now headed towards Seal Milton. Even as a stupid animal, Milton could tell that this 15-foot fucker was bad news, and he floundered away as fast as his little flippers could carry him. Something deep within his tiny walrus brain was telling him to go towards Bilger, specifically the golden flower in Bilger's pocket. The swamp behemoth was close behind, every rhythmic step bringing it ever closer. Seal Milton edged himself along, barely keeping his pace. It was oh so hard to move on land. He looked to the right, where the shimmering swamp waters lay. The lovely shimmering swamp waters. It would be so easy to just slip into the lake and disappear forever. He was fast in the waters. The giant beast wouldn't be able to find him in there. And he could catch all the fish that his heart desired. But no, there it was again, a tiny synapse firing in his tiny brain. Get to the flower. Eat the flower. The twitching body of Bilger was just up ahead, his head lodged into the mud and his big ugly posterior sticking up into the air. There, in his pocket, was the little golden lotus flower. Hollered Seal Milton. The beast was just behind him. Seal Milton threw himself at Bilger with an almighty push, cutting the flower loose from Bilger's shorts with his tusks and swallowing it down in one mighty gulp. The huge weapon of the beast came crashing down on the sorry form of Bilger again, as Seal Milton slipped out of the way just in time. He'd eaten the flower. He didn't know why, but he'd eaten the flower. It had started to rain again, and he found he could slide around on the ground. He was getting away. He was getting away from the monster. He was hungry, but not for fish, for a cheeseburger, and cheese and chips, and pork and beef and fat. It was all coming back to him. He wasn't a seal, he was Milton, and he was here to kill demons, not catch fish. He found he could move faster. Slowly, flippers became legs and hands, and blubber became skin. Then he was upright, sprinting across the mud on his 2 human feet.
Wow! Me again, baby!
Cried normal Milton, throwing his hands up in the air like he'd just won the London Half Marathon. Milton licked his teeth and laughed out in joy, for they were no longer tusks, but small, flat white pegs, normal human teeth. He ran his fingers through his hair. His glorious golden locks were back too.
Finally! I'm back! I'm fucking back!
His spirit animal was quelled. The seal had been broken. Milton turned to see that the monster was still approaching him from behind. The rain had just about washed away the last of the mud to reveal something truly terrible. Something which fired the final synapse in his epic human brain. Milton gasped.
The unstoppable metal champion!
The champion of obnium armour continued to clank forward, holding its giant sword.
What's the unstoppable metal champion? Demon number 5 on my list. doing in this shitty swamp?
Milton turned again, jogging away from the foe as he ruminated.
Could it have... No, there's no way it could have followed me all the way here. I've travelled across dimensions.
He looked back over his shoulder and yelled out to the burly warrior.
Props to you, mate. Didn't realise you were this unstoppable.
He turned back ahead.
Well, at least I don't have to go back to that fucking shit maze.
Milton looked down at himself as he ran. He was completely naked and covered in mud. There was no way he could put up any sort of fight against this thing. Not here. Not now. He was going to have to cheese it once again.
Activate!
He shouted, but nothing happened.
Activate!
Still nothing.
Oh, come on, where's my ass portal?
Quickly, Milton came to the realization that the Gustman was still activated in the witch's tower where he'd been turned into a seal.
Fuck! Oh, which way was it?
He hissed under his breath, looking around as he ran. Trees, mud, water. Nothing but trees, mud, and water. Why had he ever thought this place was nice? Seals were so goddamn stupid. The champion was far enough behind, but he couldn't keep running forever. Milton stopped, closing his eyes and rubbing his temples.
Bird, can you hear me? Oh, I know we're far apart. You're back at the tower and I'm all the way here. But I ask of you a simple favour. I know this is a long shot, and I don't know if this is actually within your power set, but can you illuminate my path to you from afar?
Milton opened his eyes, and there were a few fleeting seconds of silence, perforated only by the champion doggedly stomping towards him. Then, as if by magic, and in fact literally by magic, a white shining line appeared on the ground, leading off ahead and bending off to the right.
It's just like I've casted clairvoyance in the Bethesda hit game Skyrim. Thanks, Bird,
grinned Milton, jogging off up the path. After 20 minutes of running and occasionally slipping over in the mud, Milton came to the bottom of the hill upon which stood the foreboding stone tower. He marched his way up the wet path and pushed open the door, ascending the staircase to the little room at the top. It reeked of death and eggs in here. The less time spent here, the better. Milton went about the room gathering his effects. His beloved chalice from the horrid little wash basin, his backpack and bayonet from the nightstand, his clothes that were scattered across the floor. He dressed himself quickly and checked the hourglass clipped to his backpack.
How long have I got? Oh, fucking hell! 16.5 hours? How long did those witches have me knocked out for? I've got to get a shimmy on.
He went to peer out of the tower's little circular window to see the metal champion smash its way through the trees. Milton held his middle finger up at it.
See you around, you big omnium idiot. Right, time to go. Activate!
Milton approached the gummy portal gate and fumbled to get his demon list out of his pocket.
Rightio, next demon. What have we got here? Down number 10, that was General Obolg. Number 11, the Last Saranax. Sounds epic.
Milton drew his blade like a hero and strode towards the activated portal. Before he entered, he looked around the room, committing to memory the world where, for a very brief time, he knew what it was like to be a seal, to be free.
Let's do it, baby!
This part of this chapter of Milton's adventure was sponsored by Poost Coffee. Delicious ground coffee beans. Amazing woody earthy taste. This is Poost Coffee, and it's back with a passion. Today's the day to fill your mug with Poost. The Poost way. Bang in a sachet of Poost coffee and make your morning incredible. Because that's how they do it over at Poost Coffee.
Hello, my name is Bilger. Look at the size of my toes. That's right, my name is Bilger. Notice the hairs of my nose.